The 1st of September, 1939. Nazi Germany invades Poland, which marks the beginning of the Second World War. In May of the following year, the Germans establish Auschwitz concentration camp, located around 60 kilometers west of Krakow. The direct reason for the establishment of the camp is the fact that the mass arrests of Poles are increasing beyond the capacity of existing local prisons. In October 1941, the Nazis begin construction of Birkenau, which will become the largest of more than 40 camps and subcamps, making up the Auschwitz complex. From March 1942, Auschwitz-Birkenau plays a central role in the German effort to kill the Jews of Europe, and approximately 1 million people, probably about 90% of the victims of Auschwitz concentration camp, will die there. From March 1943 until the camp's evacuation in January 1945, one of the camp's personnel becomes a young German woman who will become notorious not only for her pure sadism, beatings, and arbitrary shooting of female inmates, but also for the savaging of women by her trained and half-starved dogs, as well as selecting prisoners for the gas chambers. After the war, she will become the most notorious of the female Nazi war criminals. Her name is Irma Grese. Irmgard Ilse Ida Grese was born on the 7th of October 1923 in Wrechen, then part of the Weimar Republic, which was the name given to the German government from 1918 to 1933. Irma was the third of 5 children, and both her parents, Mother Bertha and Father Alfred, were dairy workers. When Adolf Hitler and his Nazi party came into power in January 1933, Irma was 9 years old. Because Irma's father was not a Nazi sympathizer and despised everything that was associated with the Nazis, he never allowed his children to join the Nazi youth organizations, even though they wanted to. In January 1936, when Irma was 12 years old, her 33-year-old mother Bertha committed suicide by drinking hydrochloric acid, following the discovery of her husband's affair with the local pub owner's daughter. Irma was then raised only by her father. Alfred Grese was a devout Christian, who was very stern and strict with his children and would often use physical violence to discipline them. In school, Irma Grese performed poorly in academics, and according to her sister Helena, Irma was bullied badly. Helena recalled, "When girls were quarreling and fighting, Irma never had the courage to fight, but ran away." Eventually, in 1938, the 14-year-old Irma left school and her father's house, and worked at the Furstenberg dairy factory from the beginning of spring until winter. She then moved to Liechen, where she worked in a retail shop for 6 months as well. In 1939, at the age of 15, Irma Grese went to the Hohenlichen Sanatorium, where she worked as an assistant nurse for about 2 years and trained under the sanatorium's medical superintendent, Karl Gebhardt. The Second World War began on the 1st of September 1939, when Nazi Germany invaded Poland. At this time, Grese was still at Hohenlichen Sanatorium, where she wanted to become a full-fledged nurse. However, because she did not do well enough academically, in 1941, at the age of 17, she was instead sent to a dairy farm in Furstenberg, where she operated a butter machine. She remained there until June 1942, and the following month she was deployed to serve as a guard in Ravensbrück, which was the only major women's concentration camp established by the Nazis. Starting in the summer of 1942, SS medical doctors subjected female prisoners at Ravensbrück to unethical medical experiments. The main coordinator of these experiments was Karl Gebhardt, whom Irma knew from the Hohenlichen Sanatorium, and his assistants became Drs. Hertha Oberhäuser and Fritz Fischer. They often used a hammer to break legs of female prisoners, then infected open wounds with aggressive bacteria, and monitored the healing with and without various chemical substances such as sulfonamide, which was an early antibiotic to prevent infections. Believing it could help in treating amputee soldiers, they also tested various methods of setting and transplanting bones. Such experiments included amputations and were often performed without any anesthesia. It is believed that Grese served as an assistant nurse during the experiments and was exposed to the aforementioned atrocities, which might have had a damaging impact on her personality and turned her into a violent sadist. In early 1943, when she came home and told her family that she was supervising the female prisoners working inside the compound at Ravensbrück, her father gave her a thrashing with a belt or a whip and forbade her from coming home again. In March 1943, Irma Grese was deployed in Auschwitz-Birkenau, which was located in German-occupied Poland. Birkenau was the largest of more than 40 camps and subcamps that made up the Auschwitz complex. It opened as a branch of Auschwitz in March 1942 and served at the same time as a center for the extermination of the Jews. Some of the Auschwitz survivors remembered Irma Grese as a beautiful young woman. Nina Kaleska later recalled their first meeting. Irma Grese took my little cheek and she said, "Aha, they tell me that you look a lot like I, and I wanted to be sure that it was really true." And I, in my total naivest, I said, "Oh, I don't think there's any resemblance. I've never seen anyone more beautiful." And I meant it. She was like a vision. Dr. Gisela Perl, also an Auschwitz survivor, later said, "She was one of the most beautiful women I'd ever seen. Her body was perfect in every line, her face clear and angelic, and her blue eyes the gayest, the most innocent eyes one could imagine. And yet, Irma Grese was the most depraved, cruel, imaginative pervert I ever came across." In her memoir, 5 Chimneys, Auschwitz survivor Olga Lengyel writes that Grese had affairs not only with Dr. Josef Mengele, but with many other Nazis as well. When it came time to select women for the gas chamber, Lengyel noted that Irma Grese would purposefully pick out the most beautiful prisoners due to jealousy and spite. Masha Greenbaum remembered, "When we saw her, we used to run, just run. Because when she met you, she kicked you to the floor. And then she went to the neck with her boots, and she just killed people like that." However, there were other female prisoners to whom Irma Grese would show another side of her personality. Such was the case of Carola Steinhardt, then a young Jewish woman from Germany. She later recalled, "My sister arrived in the camp, and I wanted to know what happened to my parents. She said that they were all dead." Grese witnessed this. She saw me speaking to and hugging my sister, and she stood there and cried, something no one had ever seen before. And then she said to me, "Carola." She heard my sister call Carola, otherwise she wouldn't have known. She said, "You don't have to worry. Your sister is going to stay with you now." My sister then had to go through all kinds of different routines, and I thought we would be together, but it was just a false promise. They then sent her to a different camp. There were also some women that Irma Grese even liked. Such was the case of a Jewish woman from Slovakia, Magda Hellinger. Irma Grese, who treated Magda like an elder sister, even asked her what she thought of her new boyfriend, whom she introduced to Magda. However, towards the other inmates she remained cruel. After the war, Magda recalled, "One day before roll call, 2 runners came with 4 women, whose breasts had been split open after Irma Grese had struck them with her whip. After I took care of the women, I told Irma, 'Imagine if someone did that to you. Shame on you.' At that moment, Irma lifted her whip at me and I said, 'Strike, strike. I know you like to see blood. I am offended.' Then I walked away and Irma came after me. She said quietly, 'Forgive me.'" At Auschwitz, Grese fell in love with SS man Franz Wolfgang Hatzinger, who was the chief engineer of the construction department in the Auschwitz main camp. However, despite this relationship, Grese had many lovers, and the aforementioned Nina Kaleska, then 16 years old, was used by Irma as a messenger and lookout girl when Irma held lesbian orgies in the barracks. Kaleska later recalled, "Grese took a liking to me. Thank God she never did abuse me. But she made me stand guard in front of the barracks while she would make love to the most beautiful Jewish girls there. And when she was making love to another woman, she wanted to be alerted so I would stay guard to see if maybe the other guards of her caliber or other Germans would be coming." She was, and she had total power. She could do anything she wanted to anyone at any time. Irma Grese had numerous affairs with female inmates, especially pretty Polish women, and when she grew bored of them, she would beat them or select them for the gas chamber to be killed. However, she also abused male prisoners. When a handsome Georgian man refused Grese's advances towards him, he had to watch Irma dragging his naked girlfriend around the camp by the hair and then whipping her. After Grese tortured the woman he loved, she had the man shot and the woman sent to the camp brothel. When Mengele discovered that she was having affairs with Jewish inmates who were deemed racially inferior, he ended his intimate relationship with her. Grese had so many lovers that at one point in January 1944, she contracted syphilis. She also had numerous abortions. Dr. Gisela Perel performed one of these abortions, and Irma's only concern was the pain she would feel. Maybe because of these abortions, Grese hated other pregnant women, and at Auschwitz-Birkenau, she would tie together the legs of women in childbirth so that they were unable to deliver and died in great agony. Because of her cruelty and brutality, the prisoners nicknamed Irma Grese the hyena of Auschwitz. Her other nickname was the Beautiful Beast. At Auschwitz, Grese first performed telephone duties. Then she was transferred as a sort of light punishment to be in charge of the commando which carried stones from the outside into the camp. She received this punishment because she did not wear her caps. She was also in charge of the commando making the roads inside the camp and the gardening work. Auschwitz survivor Margaret Jastrow-Klug remembered, "One day I went to work. 2 SS soldiers with dogs were watching us. One soldier put sunglasses on his dog, and the girls told me this, and I looked and I thought it was funny. Irma Grese came to me and hit me with such force that I lost 3 teeth." In May 1944, the extermination of Hungarian Jews was to take place. During 8 weeks from the 15th of May to the 9th of July 1944, Hungarian gendarmerie officials, under the guidance of German SS officials, deported around 424,000 Jews from Hungary to Auschwitz-Birkenau, where upon arrival and after selection, SS functionaries killed the majority of them in the gas chambers. It was in May 1944 when, at the age of 20, Grese would become the senior guard of Birkenau's Camp C, supervising 6 or 7 female guards who changed every week. Camp C consisted of 28 blocks where prisoners were accommodated, as well as other blocks such as the food block, 2 stores with underwear and clothing, 2 or 3 blocks for latrines, and 2 washhouses. Normally, the accommodation would only have been suitable for 100 or a maximum of 300 prisoners. But the camp was so overcrowded that Grese had 1,000 prisoners in each block. In some of the blocks, there were bunks large enough for 5 people to sleep in, but in most of the blocks, there were neither beds nor bunks. There were approximately 30,000 prisoners, and because the camp was overcrowded, sanitary conditions were horrible. The latrine ceased to function, and Grese would later describe how, wherever you went, it was just as if the prisoners thought any place was good enough for a latrine. In the camp, Grese would carry her woven leather whip, which was covered with cellophane, so that human blood could easily be washed from it. Grese later described her whip saying, "It was a cellophane paper plaited like a pigtail. It was translucent like white glass." She would stand at the gate when the working parties were going out and coming in, and regularly beat inmates there with her whip, all for her sadistic pleasure. Later she would proudly say, "It was a very light whip, but if I hit someone with it, it would hurt." Irma Grese beat and ill-treated prisoners to such an extent that Josef Kramer, the commandant of Auschwitz-Birkenau, who was also Grese's lover, told her to stop using it. However, she went on using her whip anyway. Nevertheless, Kramer also abused prisoners. As Nina Kaleska later said, Grese and Kramer, they were a different breed of people. They looked human, but these were not human beings, because normal people cannot possibly behave in that manner. For Grese, the most frequent reasons to whip the prisoners were that they stole food because they were hungry, or they showed up late for the roll calls during which they were counted. Nina Kaleska recalled, "She would make us stand for hours at a time in freezing, horrible weather or very hot weather. People would sometimes faint. She would trot on them, she would beat them, she would unleash her dog. She would punish people very badly. She was very cruel. She was extremely cruel and tortured thousands of people." After the war, Grese's explanation for whipping prisoners during the roll calls was that they were running to and from, and she could not count them properly. Her other specialty in making these roll calls as difficult as possible was to order the prisoners to stand holding a large stone above their heads in each hand, and if they faltered, she would beat them. Grese's favorite habit was to beat women until they were bleeding and fell to the ground, and then she kicked them as hard as she could with her heavy boots. Grese also participated in selections of veteran female inmates for gas chambers. With her lover, Dr. Josef Mengele, they often performed these selections together. Holocaust survivor Alice Gahana later recalled, "When Grese and Mengele appeared, it was terror and fear. It always meant death. The way Irma Grese looked and walked made us all feel that we were less than animals." Auschwitz survivors remembered how during the selections, the female prisoners were very often paraded naked and inspected like cattle to determine whether they were fit enough to work or only fit to die. Grese would be there keeping order, and if some women ran away, she would bring them back and give them a beating. The female prisoners knew what those selections meant, and sometimes they tried to escape. However, they were brought back, terribly beaten until they bled all over the place, and put back in their lines again. The former Auschwitz prisoner named Jafran recalled what happened during one such selection. 2 selected girls jumped out of the window trying to escape. Grese approached them as they were lying on the ground and shot them twice. At Auschwitz, Grese had 2 huge dogs that she starved. Survivors recalled her riding on a bicycle with dogs at her side accompanying the female inmates on their 16-kilometer trek to work. Those who could not keep up with the column, she ordered the dogs to attack. On one occasion, when the female commando was carrying stones from outside into the camp, the female prisoners hesitated and lost control of their wagon. It swayed, bowled down the hill and capsized, scattering stones over the whole area. One survivor later testified what happened afterward. Irma sicked the 2 police dogs on them. The girls tried to escape their fangs, but the trained killers easily overtook them. The dogs were tearing at the girls' bodies. Irma came closer to observe what they were doing. Her eyes were bloodshot. The sight of blood seemed to intoxicate her. All this time, Irma Grese had a smile on her face. Another of her specialties was sending women outside the wire fence when they were working to make it appear they were attempting to escape. Helena Kopper later recalled, "Whilst Grese was in charge of the working party, she always carried a rubber truncheon. She was responsible for at least 30 deaths a day, resulting from her orders to cross the wire, but sometimes this number was even higher. It was always my job ordered by Grese to count the dead, and I, together with some other women, used to load the bodies into one of the railway wagons after working hours." Thanks to the plunder from the murdered victims, Irma Grese also had her choice of the finest clothing from all over Europe. She had her dresses tailored by the best Jewish dressmakers who had become prisoners at Birkenau, and she was particularly fond of a sky blue jacket with a dark blue tie. Irma would spend hours in front of her dressing mirror styling her hair and imagining herself as a movie star. Grese once declared, "After the war, I am going to be in films. You will see my name as a star on the screen. I know life, and I have seen many things. I feel my experiences will be useful in my career as an artist." But of course, this vulgar display of arrogance could not have been further from the truth. Irma Grese left Auschwitz on the 18th of January 1945, when Soviet forces approached the Auschwitz concentration camp complex, and the SS began evacuating Auschwitz and its subcamps. These forced marches of concentration camp prisoners became known as the Death Marches. The prisoners had to march over long distances under guard and in extremely harsh conditions. Grese accompanied one such forced transport from Auschwitz to Ravensbrück, and from there to Bergen-Belsen, where she arrived along with a large number of Ravensbrück prisoners in March 1945. When they arrived at the camp, there was almost no food. The daily portion of food consisted of a watery soup made from a variety of turnips cooked in water and 3.5 centimeters of bread a day. Sanitary conditions were terrible, and in March 1945, due to starvation, thirst, and the outbreak of typhus epidemics, the average daily mortality rate of the prisoners was between 250 and 300. Holocaust survivor Dieter Kraus, who was among the prisoners liberated at Bergen-Belsen, described seeing a group of women squatting around a pot in which they had cooked a human liver. After her arrival at Bergen-Belsen, Grese requested to remain at the camp because her lover Oberscharführer Franz Wolfgang Hatzinger was deployed there as well. Even at Bergen-Belsen, Grese kept mistreating the prisoners, who according to her own words were so dirty and ill, until the bitter end. She also compelled the female inmates to perform exhausting physical exercises, which she called making sport. She later added that she herself made sport with the prisoners. However, while she received food, the women were starving and receiving almost no rations. The aforementioned prisoner named Jafran recalled, "About a fortnight before the British troops liberated Bergen-Belsen, I saw her beat a girl in the camp. She had a pistol, but she was using a riding crop. The beatings were very severe. If they were not the cause of death, they were not called severe." Upon the eve of liberation, when it was clear that the war was lost for Germany, Grese knocked together the heads of 2 sisters when she caught them trying to eat potato peel scraps from the camp kitchen. Even though she worked at the camp for only 3.5 weeks, she was so cruel that the prisoners dubbed her the Beast of Belsen. Holocaust survivor Edda Treforest recalled how after the liberation, the enraged prisoners pushed Irma Grese's head into a toilet. On the 17th of April, 1945, 2 days after Bergen-Belsen's liberation, Irma Grese was captured by the British forces who forced the former SS camp personnel to help bury the 13,000 dead bodies in mass graves. The personnel were given starvation rations, not allowed to use gloves or other protective clothing, and were continuously shouted at and threatened to make sure that they did not stop working. Within 2 months, 17 staff members had died of typhus due to being forced to handle the bodies with no protection. Among them was Oberscharführer Franz Wolfgang Hatzinger, Irma's lover, who died of typhus on the 23rd of April, 1945. Grese and other SS female guards were temporarily imprisoned in a Wehrmacht panzer training academy about 3 kilometers from Belsen. At this time, when she was interviewed by an English journalist who asked her why she had committed the crime she had, Irma unashamedly replied, "It was our duty to exterminate antisocial elements so that Germany's future would be assured." Justice finally caught up with Irma Grese when she was tried at the Belsen Trial, which began on the 17th of September 1945. During the trial, Irma Grese twice laughed so hard that she had to lean forward in the prisoner's box to try to control herself. She held her hand to her mouth, while alongside her, Ilse Lotte, her fellow Nazi colleague, tried to conceal her giggles with her handkerchief, as the 32-year-old Peter Weingartner, another Nazi guard, said that when he had beaten one girl with a piece of rubber tubing, it was the only time he had beaten anyone. Grese also laughed uncontrollably when the wife of Josef Kramer, who was her former lover and once camp commandant of Auschwitz-Birkenau, said that when her husband used to come home from his day's work at Auschwitz, he used to pace the floor at night, and tormented by the fact that the Nazi commanders were having people put to death in gas chambers, he cried, "Why, why, why?" Other women, however, were less amused. When Kramer's wife left the court, she was slapped in the face by a Polish woman. During the trial, when the witnesses claimed that she was the worst SS woman in the camp, Grese responded that they were all lying, exaggerating, and making an elephant out of a small fly. In the end, however, she gave up and said, "I confess to the ill treatment of prisoners because it has been on my conscience." Grese admitted to the beatings, but never killing anyone, and added, "If prisoners had their faces slapped, it was only their fault. If they were more intelligent, they obeyed orders." When during the trial she broke down and wept, it was never because she was sorry for the crimes she had committed. Once Irma Grese cried when she heard her sister Helena telling the story of their home life to the court, and then when she saw her 23-year-old brother Alfred, who had twice been wounded while fighting on the Eastern Front. On the 17th of November, the British military tribunal sentenced Irma Grese to death. After the sentence was pronounced, she looked awful and cried continuously. Her eyes were red and sunken, and she was extremely nervous. Afterwards, Irma Grese, who never showed an ounce of mercy to the prisoners she supervised, asked for clemency. But in early December, Field Marshal Montgomery rejected all appeals and ordered Grese, Kramer, and others to be hanged. When she was hanged by British executioner Albert Pierpoint at Hamelin Prison on the 13th of December 1945, she was 22 years old. Walking to the gallows, her final and only word was schnell, meaning quickly. Grese was the youngest woman to die judicially under British law in the 20th century. There were no tears shed for Irma Grese. Thanks for watching the World History Channel. Be sure to like and subscribe, and click the bell notification icon so you don't miss our next episodes. We thank you, and we'll see you next time on the channel.